20. Kara stepped over the winding dune and into yet another nightmare. In the distance, black armored warriors battered at Lutgolane's gates, shouting with a murderous glee almost inhuman. The defenders above continuously fired down at them, but curiously, their many arrows had no visible effect whatsoever, as far as she could see, almost as if the invaders had somehow made themselves invulnerable to mortal weapons. Judging by what else she could see, the necromancer felt fairly certain that the straining gates would soon crash inward, gaining this savage force entrance. However, the terrible struggle there paled in her mind in comparison to the duel taking place not far from her right. She had found Norik again, yet with him she had also found not only the demon, but a furious figure clad in armor akin to the men attacking Lutgolane. Akin, that is, save for his crimson helmet. The necromancer immediately recognized Bartik's helm. Now matters made more sense. The armor of the warlord sought to reunite, but it had two hosts with which to contend, and only one who could end up with the prize. Unfortunately for Norik, he stood to lose everything, no matter what the outcome of the combat. Slay his foe, and he became the armor's puppet. Fail in the struggle, and he died at the feet of the new warlord of blood. Kara eyed the trio for several moments, trying to consider what best to do. Unable to come up with a satisfying answer, she turned back to her decaying companions. They're locked together, and the demon's only a few yards behind him. What do you... She talked to the air. Both Trist and Faustin had completely vanished, the sand revealing no trace of their path. It was as if they had simply flown into the air and vanished. Regrettably, that left the necromancer's decision completely up to her, and time looked to be rapidly running out. Norik had brought the battle to a more even level again, but as Kara watched, the hellish mantis began to move toward the combatants. Kara could think of only one reason why he would do so at such a juncture. Knowing that she had no other option remaining, the dark mage leapt forward, racing for the back of the imposing demon. If she could get near enough, she had a chance. The mantis raised one wicked limb high, awaiting the ideal moment to strike. Kara realized that she would not make it, unless, of course, she took a desperate gamble. In her hand, the necromancer already held her ceremonial dagger, which Satan Trist had suggested she might need. Until now, though, her fear of possibly losing it again had kept Kara from considering such an act. The weapon was a part of her calling, a part of her very being, and the only way she could possibly save Norik. Without hesitation, she took aim at the foul creature. Now, Zazax thought. Now. But just as the mantis chose to attack, fire burst within him, coursing through his entire body with astonishing swiftness. The monstrous insect stumbled, nearly falling on top of the two fighting figures. Zazax swiveled his head so as to see the cause of his agony, and found in his back a gleaming dagger made of something other than metal. He recognized quickly the intricate runes in the protruding handle, and knew then why such a minuscule weapon could cause him so much pain. A necromancer's ceremonial dagger. But the only such being Zazax had come across, he had quickly murdered, so surely it could not be. But there she came, hurtling toward him, despite the fact that she should have been dead. The mantis knew where he had struck her, knew that no human could have rightly survived the blow, not even those who dealt in life and death such as she. You cannot be, he demanded of her, a sense of dread building quickly within. For all their chaotic origins, demons had a very set sense of how things worked. Humans were fragile. Rip, stab, cut, or tear them apart in certain ways, and they would die. Once dead, they stayed so, unless summoned back in the form of some ghoulish servant. This female defied the rules. Dead you were, and dead you should stay. The balance dictates the terms of life and death, demon. Hardly you. She made her right hand into a fist and pointed at him. An incredible weakness spread through the demon. Zazax teetered, then caught himself. The necromancer's spell should not have affected him so thoroughly, but with her dagger in him, he became far more susceptible to anything she cast. That situation could not be allowed to continue long. Summoning what reserves he had, the mantis used his upper appendages to stir up the sand, then send it flying into the face of the enchantress. As she fought to regain her sight, Zazax's middle limbs bent back in a most impossible manner and sought out the treacherous dagger. It burned terribly, but he forced himself to seize the hilt and try to pull it free. The demon roared as he tugged at the enchanted blade, so great did the pain grow. He would rend her into bloody gobbets for this abominable act. He would pinion her, then peel away every layer of skin, every bit of muscle, all while her heart still beat. But just as the monstrous insect felt the blade begin to loosen, the necromancer uttered her final spell. And before Zazax's eyes materialized a luminescent being so glorious his very presence burned the eyes of the demonic mantis. He looked manlike, but with all imperfections washed away. His hair flowed golden, and the beauty of his countenance affected even the demon. However, even overwhelmed by the robed figure's presence, Zazax did not fail to notice the majestic, gleaming sword that the vision wielded with expert grace. Angel. Zazax knew that what he saw had to be an hallucination. Necromancers had reputations for being able to cast such terrifying illusions directly into the minds of their enemies, and yet even that knowledge could not keep the primal fear from drowning the demon's senses. In the end, Zazax only knew that one of heaven's imperious warriors now came for him. With an inhuman cry, the cowardly mantis turned from Kara and fled. As he did, the dagger slipped from his wound, causing the escaping demon to leave a steady stream of thick, black ichor trailing behind him in the sand. Kara Nightshadow watched as her adversary disappeared into the wastes of Aranok. She would have preferred a more final conclusion to her encounter with the mantis, but in her present state of exhaustion, that conclusion could have just as well gone against her. The spell would keep him from any foul play for some time, at least long enough, so Kara hoped, to deal with the unholy threat of the armor. She picked up her dagger and turned to where Norik and his own foe still battled. The necromancer frowned. If the helmed stranger won, her course would be quick and clear. The dagger would see to a swift end to the second coming of the Warlord of Blood. And if Norik won? Kara had no choice there, even. Without a host, the armor could cause no more harm. Whoever won between them, she would have to make certain that the victor did not live long enough to draw another breath. Neither Norik nor his adversary noticed the battle taking place beside them, so desperate had their own struggle become. The gauntleted hands of the two flared again and again as dark sorceries burst into life and immediately died. Although Malevolent did not wear the armored suit of Bartok, the helm alone gave him strength and power matching that, now wielded by a willing Norik. Because of that, the fight continued to be a stalemate, although both men knew that eventually the end would come for one. I am destined to take his place, snarled Augustus Malevolent. I am more than just his blood. I am his kindred spirit, his will reborn. I am Bartok, come back to the mortal plane to reclaim his rightful place. You're no more his successor than I am, returned Norik, not at all aware that his own expression matched that of the arrogant commander. His blood is mine as well. The armor chose me. Maybe you should think about that. I will not be denied. The general slipped one boot under the soldier's leg, forcing Norik off balance. They tumbled to the ground, Malevolent on top. The sand softened some of the blow when Norik's head hit, but still the veteran fighter lay momentarily dazed. Taking advantage of the situation, General Malevolent forced his hand toward his rival's visage. I will remove your face, your entire head, he hissed at Norik. Let us see then who the armor thinks more worthy. The general's red and black gauntlet blazed with wild magic, Malevolent's fingers only an inch or two from making good his dire promise. One hand pinned by his foe's own, and the other trapped between their armored bodies, Norik had little hope of preventing the sadistic general from accomplishing what he desired. At that moment, though, Norik sensed movement behind him, as if a third person had joined the fray. Malevolent looked up at the newcomer, and the triumphant sneer on his countenance switched to an expression of utter bafflement. "You?" he managed to blurt. Something within Norik urged him to take advantage. He slipped the one hand free from the general's, then immediately struck Malevolent hard in the chin. A brief burst of raw, magical energy accompanied Norik's strike, sending the helmed figure flying back as if pulled by a string attached to his head. Malevolent dropped to the sand some distance away with a harsh thud, the general too stunned at first to rise. Focused only on victory now, the veteran fighter rose and charged toward his fallen foe. In his growing certainty that he had been meant all along to triumph, Norik nearly threw himself on top of the general, an action which would have cost him his life. In Malevolent's hand materialized one of the black blades. Norik barely had time to twist out of its deadly reach, dropping to the sand just beside the other fighter. General Malevolent rolled away, ending up in a crouched position. He kept the sword between them, his mocking expression quite evident even within the blood-red helmet. "I have you now!" Leaping forward, he thrust. The tip of the ebony blade sank deep, deep into the chest of General Augustus Malevolent. The sinister noble's resummoning of his enchanted sword had immediately reminded Norik that he, too, could call his own weapon back into play. In his haste to at last be done with the mercenary, Malevolent had evidently not considered that last part. As his sword came at Norik, Norik rolled forward, at the same time thinking his own demonic blade into existence. Augustus Malevolent's thrust had come within a hair of slicing the veteran's skull in half. Norik's had materialized already a third of the way through his adversary's torso. Malevolent gaped at his wound, the blade having skewered him so quickly that his body had not quite yet registered that death was upon it. The general dropped his own weapon, which instantly faded away. In past battles, Norik Vizeren had taken no pleasure in the deaths of his foes. He had been paid for a task, and he had performed that task, but war had never been a pleasure for him. Now, however, he felt a chill run up and down his spine, a chill that stirred him, made him desire more of such bloodshed. He stood up and walked over to the gaping general, who only now slipped to his knees. "You don't need this anymore, cousin." With great force, Norik tore the crimson helmet from Augustus Malevolent's head. Malevolent screamed when he did, although not from any physical pain. Norik understood what so troubled the man more than even the lethal thrust. Understood, because at that moment he would have felt the same if someone had tried to rip the armor from his body. The power inherent in Bartik's suit seduced both of them, but in Malevolent's case, he had lost the duel and therefore lost all right to that power. Laying the helmet to the side, Norik took hold of the hilt of his sword. With easy effort, he pulled it free, then inspected the blade itself. No blood stained it. Truly a marvel. It had served him well here, served him as grandly as it had done at Vizjun. A gauntleted hand grabbed at him. General Malevolent, a manic look on his face, tried desperately to grapple with Norik. Norik shoved him back and grinned. "The war's over, General." He readied the sword. "Time to retire." One easy sweep left General Augustus Malevolent's head rolling in the sand. The headless torso joined it a moment later. As he reached down to retrieve the fabled helmet, a feminine voice called out to the exhausted but also exhilarated veteran. "Norik, are you all right?" He turned to face Kara, pleased in more than one manner by her unexpected resurrection. In the short time since they had met, she had proven her loyalty to him by sacrificing her lesser existence for his. Had she remained dead, Norik would have honored her memory, but now that she had somehow cheated Zazax's murderous strike, he instead considered her further uses. The necromancer had shown some skill, and likely had more sense than the untrustworthy Galliona. Her not unpleasing face and form also made him consider her as possibly worthy of being his consort. And what sane woman would spurn the offer of becoming consort to the warlord of blood? "I'm well, Kara Nightshadow. Very well." He opened his one hand and let the magical sword fall free. As the weapon vanished, Norik took the helmet in both hands and raised it over his head. "In fact, I am far better than well." "Wait!" The raven-tressed woman rushed up to him, concern in her almond-shaped eyes. Pretty eyes, the new warlord decided. Eyes reminiscent of another woman he had briefly known during his apprenticeship in Kegistan. The helmet. "Yes, it's mine at last. I'm now complete." She pressed against him, placing one hand on the breastplate. Her eyes seemed to implore. "Is this truly what you want, Norik? After all we spoke of earlier, do you now really desire to wear the helmet? To give yourself up to Bardak's ghost?" "Give myself up? Woman, do you know who I am? I'm his own blood. Blood calls to blood, remember? In a way, I already am Bardak. I just didn't know it. Who better to carry on? Who better to bear the title, the legacy?" "Bardak's shade himself," she countered. "There will not be any more Norik Vizarin, not in mind and soul. And if the armor has its way, I dare say that even in form you will begin to resemble your predecessor. It will be Bardak who wears the suit. Bardak who reclaims his role. Bardak who slaughters more innocents, just as he, not you, slaughtered your friends." Friends. The horrific images of the mangled, blood-soaked bodies of Satan Trist and Faustin blossomed once more in Norik's beleaguered mind. They had been brutally murdered, and he had suffered terrible guilt for those murders for each waking moment since then. He recalled quite succinctly how the armor had slain each, and now Kara spoke of other deaths to come. He lowered the helmet slightly, battling with himself. "No, I can't let that happen. I can't." His arm suddenly rose again, holding the helmet just above his head. "No!" Norik roared, his denial aimed now at the enchanted suit. "She's right, damn you! I won't be a part of your bloody campaign!" But what foolishness! A voice, so much like his own, whispered in his mind. "The power is yours. You can do with it what you wish. A world of order, where no kingdom wars, where no one is poor. That is the true legacy. That is all Bardak sought." It sounded so very good. Simply place the helmet on his head, and Norik would be able to change the world to what it should be. The demons would even serve him in this monumental task, their wills subservient to the power of the warlord. He would create a perfect realm, one that even heaven would envy. And all he had to do was put on the helmet, accept his destiny. He suddenly felt Kara shift. One hand slipped from the helmet, seizing the necromancer's own in an iron grip that made Kara gasp. From her own hand slipped a gleaming blade of what looked like bone or ivory. She had been about to use it on him. "Stupid female!" Norik snapped, not noticing that his voice did not entirely sound as it should. He shoved her to the sand. "Stay put! I'll deal with you in a moment!" Despite his warning, the dark mage tried to rise, but arms of sand arose from each side, pinning her to the ground. More sand flowed over her mouth, preventing her from casting any verbal spells. Eyes bright in anticipation, Norik took hold of the helmet again and placed it on his head. A world such as he had never known now lay open to him. He saw the might he wielded, the legions he could command. The destiny thwarted by his fellow Viserai could once more be attained. The warlord of blood lived again. But a warlord needed soldiers. Leaving Kara to struggle, Norik climbed to the top of the dune and stared at Lutgolain. With avid interest, he watched the demonic warriors tear at the walls and gates. The city could not be more than a few moments from bloody destruction. He would let his horde have their fun, let them race through Lutgolain, slaying every man, woman, and child, then reveal to them his return to the mortal plane. He imagined the blood flowing everywhere, the blood of all those who feared and hated him, the blood of those who would perish at his command. The dune exploded around him, a pair of dark forms leaping up out of the sand. 2 strong sets of hands seized his arms, twisting him back. "Hello, old friend," a horrifyingly familiar voice whispered on one side of him. "It's been a lifetime since we last saw you." The hold the armor had over Norik shattered for the moment, as recognition mixed with sudden terror. "Satan?" He turned in the direction of the voice and stared close into the peeling, decaying visage of his dead companion. "You haven't forgotten us. How nice." The ghoulish figure smiled, revealing the blackened gums and yellowed teeth. Unable to flee, Norik turned his head the other way, only to find Faustin there. The murdered Viserai's collar had slipped, showing the tattered, crusted gap in his throat. "No, no, no!" They pulled him back down the dune, back toward where Kara still fought to free herself. "We tried to see you on the ship, Norik," Trist went on, "but you certainly didn't seem so willing to see us." Their eyes never blinked, and the stench of death became apparent the longer they held him so near. Their very presence overwhelmed Norik, so much that even the armor could not demand control. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Satan, Faustin, I'm so sorry." "He's sorry, Faustin," commented the wiry undead. "Did you know that?" Norik glanced at the gaunt Viserai, who nodded solemnly. "We accept your apology, but I'm afraid we've no choice with what we now do, my friend." With remarkable speed and strength, Satan Trist tore the helmet from Norik's head. It felt as if the Revenant had ripped the veteran's skull off as well, so great did the pain of separation feel. Now Norik truly understood how Malevolent had felt. He cried out, pulling at his captors with a fury even they grew hard-pressed to combat. "Hold him! Hold!" Both gauntlets flared a furious crimson. Even caught up in the intense agony coursing through him, Norik noted the gloves and feared for his friends who had already died once because of his inability to do anything to stop the armor's damnable actions. That their troubled spirits had followed him, he understood completely. Such an injustice demanded retribution. Unfortunately, the armor had no intention of granting them that opportunity. The area around Norik exploded, sending the 2 undead hurtling away and ripping through the dune from which they had just descended. He stared in horror at the 2 bodies, fearing that once more they had perished. "No, not again. I won't let you do it again." The veteran fighter seized one hand in the other, and although both struggled, this time his determination proved too great even for Bardic's legacy. Norik tugged, using his own suffering to augment his strength. The right gauntlet came free. Without hesitation, he threw it as far away as he could. Immediately, the suit tried to turn that way, seek after its lost member, but Norik would no longer be denied. He forced the armor a different direction, that of Lutgolain, now visible through the collapsing gap in the dune. How long he controlled the power, and not the other way around, the soldier could not say. Norik only knew that he had to try to make as much right as possible. So long as his outrage, his guilt, fueled his actions, he had the advantage, and Lutgolain had little enough time. He raised the free hand toward the distant city. The demons had at last torn their way past one of the gates. Norik could hesitate no longer. The words he spoke had never been taught to him. They had been Bardic's words, Bardic's magic. But Bardic's memories, his ancestors' memories, had become just as much Norik's by this point. He knew what they could do, knew what they had to do, and so he willingly spoke them, even though that part of him still enthralled to the armor struggled to prevent it from happening. Had he been witness to the wicked spell work performed by Malevolin and Zazax in the general's tent, Norik might have noted that what he said almost sounded like Malevolin's incantation, but chanted in reverse. As it was, he simply knew that if he did nothing, an entire city would become awash in the blood of its people. And at the end of that incantation, the descendant of the warlord of blood shouted out two last words. "Mortius Diabolum! Mortius Diabolum!" Within the gates of Lutgolain, the defenders stood and fought, knowing already that they battled men without souls, men who were not men, but something far more monstrous. Yet the Sultan's warriors braced themselves for death, even as the citizens prepared to weather the dangerous storm waters and try to escape. The captains of the ships had little hope, though. Already one of their vessels swamped, and another shattered against the side of the docks. The waves roared inland, making it dangerous even to stand near the water. 3 men had already been washed off, as they had tried to prepare the vessels for refugees. But as all hope faded, a sight both unsettling and miraculous happened. Just within the city walls, the fiery-eyed soldiers in black stopped, turned their heads back in clear dismay, and then let loose with a chorus of unearthly, savage howls. Then, from out of the backs of each, erupted hideous, spectral forms, with grotesque, inhuman faces, and limbs twisted and clawed. Those who witnessed the event would later say they saw both rage and despair on those demonic faces, just before the specters, screaming piteously, were cast out into Aranok in 1,000 different directions. For a moment, the army of darkness stood at attention, weapons ready, suddenly empty eyes staring straight. Then, as if all within them had been drained away, along with the phantoms, each of the monstrous soldiers began to collapse in on himself. One by one, then row by row, the invaders dropped, bones, faded flesh, and fragments of plate spilling into piles that left more than one of Lutgolain's defenders unable to hold on to the contents of their own stomachs. One of the commanders, the very one whom General Augustus Malevolin had ordered to find Norik Vizerin, became the first to mouth what everyone else thought. Stepping toward the nearest of the grisly sets of remains, the officer gingerly prodded it. "They're dead," he finally muttered, unable to believe he and the rest of his people would live after all. "They're dead. But how?" "Norik." He turned to find Kara free, the gleaming ivory dagger ready in her hand. From his left and right came the 2 revenants, the determination of the dead forever tattooed on their expressions. "Kara." He glanced at his former comrades. "Faustin. Seyden." "Norik," continued the necromancer, "please listen to me." "No!" The mercenary instantly regretted his harsh tone. She only sought to do what even he knew had to be done. "No, listen to me instead. I've got some control over the armor now, but I can feel that already slipping away. I guess I'm just too exhausted to fight it much longer." "How could you even manage to fight it at all?"
"He is Bartek's progeny, after all," remarked Seyden. "Something that the armor needed in order to fulfill its destiny, but that it did not understand worked both ways. What other answer?"
She lowered her gaze. Norik could read the pain in them. Although a necromancer, the pale woman felt no pleasure or satisfaction in slaying one who had not chosen to cause such evil. Yet so long as he lived, all humanity lay threatened. "You'd better do it, quick. One swift thrust straight through the throat. It's the only way." "Norik." "Hurry, before my mind changes." He did not simply refer to any sudden reluctance on his part, and they all knew it. The risk remained that at any second the armor might transform him again into the ideal host for its insidious desires.
"Norik."
"Do it."
"This is not how it was supposed to be."
rasped Trist in open bitterness.
"Faustin, he swore to us."
The Viserai, of course, said nothing, instead moving toward Norik. With great reluctance, Satan slowly followed suit. Norik swallowed, hoping the madness would end soon. The hand, still gloved, suddenly rose. Faustin seized it in his own.
"Best do as he says, necromancer,"
a sullen Trist murmured.
"Looks like we don't have long."
Kara came toward him, clearly steeling herself for what she had to do. "I'm sorry, Norik. This is not how I would wish it. Not as it should be."
"Nor is it how it will be,"
a peculiar, almost hollow voice answered. Horazon stood a short distance behind the necromancer, but Horazon was something different about him. The glimpse Norik had earlier had of the ancient mage had made him think of Horazon as a cowardly-looking hermit, most likely bereft of most of his wits. However, this figure, while still clad in rags and with hair like uncut weeds, had a presence that made all else around him seem insignificant. Norik had a suspicion now what had made Malevolent look up at that most vital moment in the battle, for surely the ancient mage's appearance would have shocked the half-possessed general as well. A massive, unexpected surge of bitterness and hatred welled up within the fighter, all aimed at his foul brother. No! Horazon was not his brother. Once again the armor sought to re-establish its control, rekindle the insidious spirit of Bardock. Norik managed to fight the emotions down, but he knew that next time the suit would likely prevail. The robed figure moved purposefully toward him, and as he did, Norik noticed a curious shimmer around him. The captive warrior squinted, trying to make out what caused it. Horazon's entire body had been encased in a thin layer of glittering, almost transparent sand grains. "Blood calls to blood," the Viserai murmured. His eyes stared brightly, never blinking. Even the two undead holding onto Norik seemed taken aback by his presence. "And blood will end this travesty now." Norik could feel the will of the suit battering at his mind, struggling physically with his body. Only the combined efforts of he and his comrades kept it from succeeding for the moment. "Horazon," Kara whispered. The white-haired sorcerer glanced her way, and the woman stepped back. "No, you are him, but you also are not." He gave all of them, a condescending smile. "This living shell is another's, a too curious sorcerer who long ago found the arcane sanctuary by accident, but in the process lost his senses forever. I have watched over him ever since, feeling some responsibility." Foregoing any further explanation as to what in the underground sanctum might have destroyed a mind so, the glittering figure glanced at his borrowed hands. "So fragile is flesh. More stable and lasting are earth and stone." "You!" Kara gaped, her eyes nearly as wide open as her mouth. "I know you at last. He talked to you, seemed to even obey you. The great Horazon seemed so willing to obey you, which made no sense until now. You are the presence I felt, the presence of the very sanctuary itself." He nodded, his own eyes never blinking once. "Yes, over time it just seemed the natural path, the natural way of things." Still battling the insidious incursions of Bardock's enchanted armor, it took Norik a moment longer to understand. And when he did, the answer so astounded him that he nearly dropped his defenses. Horazon and the arcane sanctuary were one and the same. My own mind almost shattered by what I had been through. I came here to escape the memories, escape the horror, and so I built my sanctum and dwelled underneath the sand, away from the events of the world. A smile crossed the false Horazon's face. the sort of smile attempted by someone who had all but forgotten such minor mortal practices. And as I kept remaking my domain over and over in my own image, it became more me than the faltering shell I wore, until at last one day I gave what remained within and took upon a new, stronger, and far more durable form. And so I have been ever since. Horazon might have gone on further, but at that moment Norik's world turned blood red. He felt an all-consuming rage build. He would not be denied again. Horazon had escaped his wrath at Vizjun, but even if he had to burn away the entire desert, the warlord would have his final vengeance. Horazon's puppet looked his way again, holding out one hand as if asking something of the armored figure. A gauntlet, the same one Norik had earlier torn off and thrown away, materialized on the aged sorcerer's own hand. Blood calls to blood, and I am calling you, brother. Our war is over. Our time is over. We are over. Your power negates mine. Mine negates yours. Join me now, where we both belong, far from the sight of men. The other gauntlet tore free from Norik, flying over to the glittering figure's ungloved hand. Then, in rapid succession, each piece of armor from his legs, torso, and arms flew forth, the crimson suit quickly remaking itself bit by bit on the elder's body. Somewhere along the way, the torn, stained robe of the hermit vanished, replaced by other garments more suitable to the armor. Even the boots Bartek had worn left Norik to join the rest of the suit. The false Horazon raised his arms as his astonishing work went on, eyes never blinking, lips set grimly. With each loss, Norik's mind edged nearer to what it had more or less been like before the armor had claimed him. The memories and thoughts became wholly his own, not that of a murderous demon master. Yet he could never be rid of the terrible days since the tomb, never be rid of the horrors and death of which he had played an unwilling but great part. And when it was done, the white-haired figure stretched out a gauntleted hand again, summoning the helmet. Placing that in the crook of one arm, Horazon's puppet looked over Norik and the others. It is time for the world to forget Bartek and Horazon. You would do well to do the same, all of you. Wait! Kara dared approach the enigmatic form. One question. Please, tell me. Did you send this one? She indicated Horazon's host. To find me in Lut-Gholein? Yes. I sensed something amiss and knew that a necromancer so near, a necromancer who should not be in the city above, had to be involved. I needed you closer so that I could discover why. As you slept, as you ate, I learned what I needed to know from you. He stepped back from her, from all of them. Our conversation is at an end. I leave you on your own now. Remember this, though. The arcane sanctuary exists in many places, has many doorways, but I advise you now to never seek it again. His darkening tone left them with no doubt as to what he meant by the last. Horazon had no desire to be a part of the living world again. Those who would disturb him would risk much. He suddenly seemed to lose form and substance, bits of him crumbling away, as if even flesh and metal had become grains of sand. With each second, the armored mage looked less like anything mortal and more a very part of the landscape. Norik Vizeren, Horazon called in that odd, echoing voice. It is time to create your own legacy. Clad in the same garments he had worn upon entering Bartek's tomb, even his own boots having somehow been returned to him by the astounding sorcerer, Norik pulled free from the revenants and started forward. Wait! What do you mean by that? But Horazon's host, now a man completely of sand, only shook his head. Of all of him, only the eyes remained somewhat human. Even as Norik neared, the figure shrank, his sandy form melting into the dunes around. By the time the veteran fighter reached the area, it was already too late. Only a small lump of loose grains remained to mark Horizon's past presence. Seconds later, even that no longer existed. "It's over," Kara quietly remarked.
"Yes, it is,"
agreed Seyden Trist. Something in his tone made Norik now turn to the two ghouls. Both undead had a peculiar look in their eye, as if they waited for something else to happen. The necromancer guessed first. "Your quest is over, is it not? Just as with Horizon, your time in this world is at an end." Faustin nodded. Seyden gave what seemed a sad grin, or perhaps his failing flesh and muscle simply made it seem so.
"He came when he felt the armor stir, but too late, so he granted us this chase, but with the promise that when it finished, so would we."
"He?" Norik asked, joining Kara. "But it was my spell and my dagger that brought you back."
"His trickery to throw you off."
The smaller of the undead looked around.
"Sanctimonious bastard can't even show up now that it's over."
However, as he finished, a brilliant blue light suddenly shone down on the four, turning their small patch of desert as bright as, if not brighter than, a cloudless day at noontime. Seyden Trist would have spat in disgust if such a simple feat had been within his ability anymore. Instead, he shook his head, or rather let it rock back and forth once, then added,
"Should have known better. Damned strutting angel."
"Angel?" Norik looked up in the direction of the light, but found no source for it, much less an angel. Still, what else could explain so much? The ghoul glared at it.
"At least show yourself."
When nothing happened, he glanced at Norik and added,
"Typical. Just like his kind, hiding in the shadows, pretending they're above it all, but putting their hands in everything."
"I know this light," Kara muttered. "I caught a glimpse of it in the tomb. It's what drew me away from your bodies."
"He likes his tricks, the Archangel does."
Trist eyed Faustin, who nodded again. To the two living members, the wiry revenant continued.
"And for his last one."
"Damn you, Seyden, no!" Norik scowled at the heavens, scowled at the unseen Archangel. "It's not fair. They had no choice in the matter."
"Please, it's time, and we want it so, Norik."
"You can't mean it." Seyden chuckled, a harsh sound.
"I swear it, on my life, friend."
The blue light focused suddenly on the revenants, bathing them in such brilliance that Norik had to shield his eyes. Faustin and the smaller ghoul became harder and harder to see.
"Time to buy that farm you always wanted, Norik."
The light flared then, becoming so intense that it momentarily blinded the veteran and his companion. Fortunately for both, the burst lasted only a few seconds, but even with that, by the time their eyes recovered, it was to find that not only had the heavenly illumination completely faded away, but with it had gone the two undead. Norik stared at the spot, at first unable to speak. A hand touched his own. Kara Nightshadow gave him a look of sympathy. "They have moved on to the next step in the eternal journey, on to their next role in helping to maintain the balance of the world." Maybe. Wherever they had gone, Norik knew that he could be of no aid to them. The best he could do was keep their memories alive in him, and do something with his own life in honor of the friendship the three had built. He glanced up again, noticed for the first time that the ever-present storm clouds had finally quieted. In fact, They had already begun to dwindle to the point where patches of clear sky could be made out.
"What will you do now?" the necromancer asked him.
"I don't know." He glanced in the direction of Lut Gholein, the only sign of civilization for days. "Go there first, I suppose. See if they need any help cleaning up. After that, I just don't know. What about you?" She, too, looked to the far-off city, giving him a chance to study her profile.
"Lut Gholein makes sense also. Besides, I wish to discover whether Captain Geronin and the King's Shield are there. I owe him a debt. He treated me well, as if I were his own daughter, and he probably fears I drowned at sea."
Having no desire to part from her company just yet, Norik responded, "I'll come with you then, if you don't mind." That brought an unexpected smile from Kara. Norik liked it when the dark-haired woman smiled.
"Not at all."
Recalling the ways of the many nobles he had served, Norik offered her his arm, which after a moment's hesitation the necromancer took. Then, together, the weary pair made their way through what remained of the ruined dune and headed back towards civilization. Neither looked behind them to where the head and body of General Augustus Malevolon already lay, half covered by the drifting sand, where Horizon and the armor had faded into the desert itself. The weary, battered soldier especially had no desire to be reminded of what had happened, and what could have happened if matters had taken a turn to the dark. The legacy of Bartek, the legacy of the warlord of blood, had been buried once again from the sight and knowledge of all. This time, hopefully, forever. Epilogue. Night fell upon the desert of Aranok, a solemn, brooding night. The creatures of the day hurried to the safety of their lairs, while those who hunted in the darkness came forth in search of careless prey. And from beneath the sand slowly emerged a monstrous form, one that would have sent maggots, scarabs, and vulture demons fleeing in mindless panic. Mandibles snapped open and closed several times, and bulbous yellow orbs that glowed faintly in the darkness carefully perused the unyielding landscape, searching somewhat fearfully. Zazax rose unsteadily, a pool of brackish, black fluids underneath him. The wound caused by the necromancer's dagger refused to be healed by his power, and the mantis knew that he could not yet petition his lord Belial to help him. By this time, Belial would know of his failure, and worse, the decimation of the infernal horde summoned to aid General Malevolon. The mantis had sensed the terrible spell being cast even as he had fled. Who had been responsible for it, he could only guess, but it had meant the certain end for most of the lesser demons. Summoning such numbers in so quick a fashion had required each hellish warrior to be initially bound to the mortal shell they had been given. With the passing of time, even as little as a month, they would have grown more adapted to this plane, been able to fully cast off the husks. This new spell, though, had torn them from their earthly anchors far too soon. Only the strongest would survive the extraordinary forces unleashed by the abrupt separation. In human terms, it would have been akin to removing a baby from the womb more than a month before its proper birth time. Only the strongest would survive. The few survivors would be condemned to wander Aranok without any guidance, unable to return to hell without aid. Unlike Zazax, most of these demons lacked sense enough to plan beyond the moment. Belial had relied on his lieutenant for their guidance. In that lay the mantis's only hope for redemption. His Dark Lord might forgive him if Zazax managed to gather those who remained and send them back to hell. For that, the demon would need another human dupe, capable of sorcery, but there were always plenty of those. Of more immediate importance, however, was the necessity of finding prey of his own, something to provide the energy he needed to combat his wound. The mantis would have preferred a nice, ripe merchant camped out for the night, but at this point anything he could catch would have to do. Nervously, the demon moved about on the sand. The cursed necromancer's spell still lingered, albeit with less influence than before. Illusions of angels and other fearful sights on occasion materialized before Zazax, but with effort each time he managed to fight off the urge to flee. When he had regained his strength, recovered from his wounds, the mantis would find Norik Vizeran and the female. He would impale each, making certain that they lived, then slowly work on peeling the flesh from first one, then the other. After that, Zazax would devour them slowly, savoring each bloody morsel. Zazax. He froze, waves of fear seeking to wash over him.
Damn the human spell!
Would the last vestiges of it never fade away? How many illusions, how many whispering voices would the demon have to suffer before it all stopped?
Smelled you from afar, knew you immediately.
The giant mantis looked around, but saw nothing. So it was only in his head this time. He could suffer that well enough. A shadow, darker than the night, swept across Zazax, completely startling the wounded monster.
Cunning, lying, traitorous little bug.
Zazax froze. None of the creations of the female's spell work had ever spoken in his mind with such elaborate conviction.
Who dares?
He rasped, turning in the direction from which he sensed the voice in his head somehow originated.
Who?
And before the hellish mantis loomed the most terrible of all the nightmares he could have dreamed. The demon's mandible stretched wide, and a single, almost plaintively spoken word tried unsuccessfully to completely escape.
Diable!
A scream punctuated the stillness of the nighttime desert. A scream seemingly of no earthly origin. It caused the various creatures of Aranok to pause in whatever they had been doing and listen in absolute terror. Even long after the cry abruptly cut off, they remained unmoving, fearful that whatever had preyed upon the source of the mournful sound might next be coming for them. And among those of Belial's demons that yet survived from the debacle at Lut Gholein, that fear took a greater form. They sensed what had happened, sensed the force behind it, and knew that for them, and the humans of this mortal plane, the nightmare might just be beginning.